Good morning, afternoon, or evening. How y'all doing today? Welcome back to Mr. Morrow's Algebra class. Today we're going to be talking about solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Now, there are several ways to solve a quadratic function. Please remember that the quadratic function is in the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, or f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember that the f of x and the y, they're just fancy ways of being the same thing. Now, how do we solve a quadratic function or equation? Well, very simple. We can use the square root method, which we learned already. We can graph it, which we learned already. We can factor it and then use the zero product property, which we learned already. And what we have left to learn is how to complete the square and how to use what's called the quadratic formula. We will be completing the square today. That is what we're going to be learning today, how to complete the square. Now, it's very simple. However, like everything in math and in life, there are steps, there are procedures. If you follow the steps and procedures, life will be very, very easy for you here in this section. If you don't, it may get a little bit difficult and you may get confused. So I strongly suggest that you follow directions. Okay, so square root method we already learned, so we can skip that. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, completing the square. In order to complete the square, okay, you got to realize that completing the square allows you to transform an unfactorable trinomial into a factorable perfect square trinomial. How does it work? You can make a perfect square trinomial from the x squared plus bx value simply by adding b over 2 squared. Be careful. A lot of times my boys get confused with the axis of symmetry, which is negative b over 2a, and the completing the square, which is b over 2 squared. What ends up happening is the following. When you get x squared plus bx plus b over 2 squared, you create a perfect trinomial, a perfect square trinomial. What does he mean by that? I mean something like this, x plus 3 squared. That's a perfect square binomial, okay, which turns into a perfect square trinomial. So before we learn how to solve the quadratic equation by completing the square, let's practice the simple act of just completing a square. We're not going to solve yet. We're just going to complete a square, step by step, everything by steps. So, for example, how do I complete the square for the given binomial? Okay, step 1, identify the b. What is the b here, guys? What is the b here, guys? Okay, it's not 10, guys. It's negative 10, my brothers. Step 2, find b over 2 squared. So step 2, b over 2 squared, you're going to have negative b over 2, so that's negative 10 over 2, which is negative 5 squared. Step 3, add the value to complete the square. So, step 3, we've got x squared minus 10x plus negative 5 squared, which equals x squared minus 10x plus 25, and then rewrite as the square of a binomial. Now here's where it gets a little complicated for people that don't know their perfect squares. When I see this, I remember that this is a minus 2b plus b squared. However, a lot of people don't remember how to factor. So instead of going from this negative 5 squared to 25, I came up with a nice little trick. When you have x squared minus bx plus your b over 2 squared. Take the square root of the first term, which is x, and then take the inside, just the b over 2 part, and put it here, and you've got your answer. So in this case, this would be x minus 5 squared. Trust me, that's going to come in handy when you get to nasty fractions. Most people can look at x minus 10x, x squared minus 10x plus 25, say, oh yeah, that's x minus 5 squared. But what if I gave you, instead of a plus 25, I gave you, 16 64ths? Would you know how to go backwards from there? Most people will not until you get a lot of practice. So stick to what I'm saying. Take the inside part to create your perfect square binomial. Now, so another example. I just want you to complete the square here. We're not solving yet. So I've got x squared plus, what's my b? 6. What's my b over 2? 3 squared. What is the perfect square binomial here? X plus 3 squared. You took the first term, square root it, took the inside term, and put it right next to each other. B. Okay. X squared plus 8x. What's my b? What's my b over 2 squared? 4 squared. What's my perfect square binomial? X plus 4 squared. C. I got x squared minus 32. What's my b? What's my b over 2 squared? Negative 16 squared. What's my perfect square binomial? X minus 16 squared. Good. Now here's the fun part. X squared minus 5x. What's my b? No, what's my b? Negative 5. What's my b over 2 squared? Leave it as a fraction. Leave it as a fraction. Leave it as a fraction, guys. 2.5 is not a fraction. 2.5 is not a fraction. It's just negative 5 halves x squared. That's where it gets confusing. If you went ahead and simplified that, you'd have x squared minus 5x plus 25 over 4. You're not going to know that that turns into x minus 5 halves squared. But using my method, you will. So square root, the first term, and the inside part goes as your second term. Questions before we continue, gentlemen? Sir, my brother. Correct. Basically, you just follow the directions that I gave you. Yes, sir. Sorry for people out in the internet world, they just asked me, so basically you take the b and divide it by 2 and square it. Yes, that's exactly what I just finished saying. Thank you so much. Now, how to solve a quadratic equation function by completing the square? Okay. In order to do this, pay attention to the rules. Okay? Number 1, first of all, you want to isolate the ax squared plus bx and divide a to both sides unless a is 1. You cannot complete the square with this 3 here. That's your a. So the first thing I want to do is isolate the ax squared and bx. So I'm going to take 3x squared minus 12x. I'm going to subtract 6 to both sides, giving me negative 6. Now I cannot, I repeat, I cannot have an a in front of the x squared. So I'm going to divide everything here by 3, giving me x squared minus 4x equals negative 2. Does that first step make sense? Is that clear? Does everyone see that? Isolate the ax squared and the x, Divide by a if it's anything other than 1. 2. Complete the square, but this time, remember how we added b over 2 squared? Remember that in an equation, whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other side. Very good. So, for our intents and purposes, I've got x squared minus 4x. What's my b? Negative 4. So what's my b over 2 squared? Negative 2 squared equals negative 2 plus my negative 2 squared. Please notice that I have to add the b over 2 squared to both sides. Is everyone with me here? Okay. Step 3, factor the trinomial. Okay, what does that mean? Factor this. What does this become? X minus 2 squared equals, what's negative 2 plus 4? 2. Is everyone with me so far? Promise? Step 3, find the square roots and then just solve for x. How do I get rid of a power of 2? I square it. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus plus or minus square root of 2. Now I got to solve for x. How do I get x alone here? Add 2 to both sides. So x equals 2 plus or minus square root of 2. What on earth does that mean, Mr. Morrill? What that means is x equals 2 plus square root of 2 and 2 minus square root of 2. We don't use calculators, so you leave it just like that. If you can simplify the radical, you do so. But in this case, you cannot, so you're set. Does that make sense, gentlemen? I promise. Okay? Questions before I continue, gentlemen? Now would be the time, my brothers. Okay. Let's do some examples then. Okay, first things first, I want to get the x squared and the x's alone. So I'm going to subtract 3 to both sides and x to both sides. This gives me 2x squared minus 2x equals 9 minus 3 is 6. I cannot have an a in front of the x squared, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2, giving me x squared minus x equals 3. What's my b here? What's my b here? Negative 1. There's an invisible 1 here, gentlemen. So what's my b over 2 squared? Negative 1/2 squared. So I got to add that to both sides. So what is the trinomial factored now? X minus 1/2, great, squared, equals, this is 3 plus 1/4, right? So go ahead and make your life easy. Turn it into a mixed number. This is 3 1/4, so that's 13/4. How do I get rid of a power of 2? I square root it. So x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus square root of 13 over 4. Here's where you got to be careful. This is going to equal, when you look at this, do I have a perfect square there? No, really? Because I see this. I see 1/2 equals plus or minus square root of 13 over 2. Isn't the square root of 4 a 2? Remember I told you during homework today that you can simplify that division? It's the square root of 13 over the square root of 4. So then you add 1/2 to both sides, and x equals 1/2 plus or minus square root of 13 over 2. Talk to me, boys. You're going to have to deal with fractions here. Questions, comments, concerns, problems, issues. Okay. Solve the equation. Okay. When I want you to solve the quadratic equation and you have a y, you simply make it a 0 first. So 0 equals x squared plus 3x minus 6. Add 6 to both sides. 6 equals x squared plus 3x. What's my b? Okay, x is never the b here, guys. What's my b? Okay, 3x is never my b either. What is the b here, guys? So I'm going to add b over 2 squared. So what would b over 2 be? 3 over 2 squared, which I must add to both sides. Bless you. So that's 9/4 plus 6 equals, how do I factor that out? X plus 3/2 squared. Got to add fractions. So, or you know what? You can make it, no, you don't want to make it a mixed number. You want to make it an improper fraction. So this is 6 9/4, which is 24 plus 9, so that's 33. Okay, so I've got x plus 3/2 squared equals 33/4. How do I get rid of a power of 2? I square root it. So I've got the x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus the square root of 33 over the square root of 4. I'm going to go ahead and individualize those because my life will be easier. Now I go x plus 3/2 equals plus or minus square root of 33 over 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. Then I subtract 3/2 to both sides, and x equals negative 3/2 plus or minus the square root of 33 over 2. Talk to me, guys. It's a lot of work. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. Probably have time for one more. Let's go ahead and do number 3. Subtract 4 to both sides. X squared minus 4x equals 96. What's my b? Negative 4. What's my b over 2 squared? Negative 2 squared, which I must add to both sides, guys. I have to add it. So I'm going to add negative 2 squared to both sides. What does this factor out to be? X minus 2. Very good. Squared. What's 96 plus 4? 100. How do I get rid of a power of 2? I square root it. So I've got x minus 2 equals plus or minus 10. Add 2 to both sides. So x equals 2 plus or minus 10. Please remember what that means. That means it's x equals 2 plus 10, which is 12, and 2 minus 10, which is negative 8. Boys, this is a very complicated thing, and I don't have anyone asking any questions. Do you see this? Are you sure? Okay, I will post the video in case you have to watch it again. Homework is valid for 8-8. Thank you very much. Hope you learned a lot and have a great day. Bye-bye.